Hi, my name is Melise Eriksson, and this is my individual presentation for 21st Century Applications of Psychology. The title we will be considering today is titled Treating Anxiety and Depression in Young Adults, a randomized controlled trial comparing clinician-guided versus self-guided internet-delivered cognitive behavioural therapy. It was published in the Australian and New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry in 2018. I am going to take you through what I consider to be the strengths and weaknesses of the article. And we're going to start with the title. As you can see, it's informative and self-explanatory, and it provides a clear understanding of the writer's intent. Though it is long and a mouthful, it is what also drew me to the article initially. Having identified a gap in both service engagement and previous research, the current study sought to determine the effectiveness, suitability, and acceptability of a short internet-delivered cognitive behavioural therapy, or ICBT, on depression and anxiety in young adults aged 18 to 24, when delivered with and without the accompanying influence of a clinician to support participants. The authors have provided an accurate synopsis of their research. It is a self-contained summary of the paper, including the aim of the trial. The design of the study was outlined in a clear and meaningful manner, and a conclusion that related directly back to the title. It was an appropriate summary of the practical implications and relevance to society. However, whilst providing a relatively clear overview, I did realise upon reading the whole manuscript that the abstract did highlight the more positive aspects of the study. The limits or caveats of the study were downplayed, leading to a lack of balance in the description of the most important findings. The introduction is considered the foundation for the study. So the research domains, the novelty or relevance to current research, and the questions they're going to be asking. Let's look at the structure of the current study. It started with stating that anxiety and depression are common in young adults, that young adults are less likely to seek treatment for depression and anxiety. There are associated long-term impacts for this lack of seeking treatment, and there are barriers to this treatment. They outlined these and used evidence-based claims to support them, including one article from 2007 titled Mental Health of Young People, a Global Public Health Challenge, that has been cited over 2,200 times in a similar context. Very, very relevant and appropriate data. Internet-based cognitive behavior therapy and its use with adults was identified, and clinician-guided studies were considered to be superior in terms of adherence and also in terms of clinical outcomes. This was back in, say, 2011 and 2010. However, contrary to these studies, it was identified that there were studies in 2015 and 16 that identified that self-guided approaches could have similar outcomes to clinician-guided. So these are the topics they identified and the research gap that was made clear. Young adults, anxiety and depression, internet-delivered, clinician involvement, and adherence and satisfaction. The introduction had a clearly defined purpose. It was relevant to current research in a world increasingly looking towards internet-based services. The rationale between previous and current research is clear, and the deductions made to identify the gaps in literature and research were relatively easy to follow. Despite identifying the decreased likelihood, however, of young adults to access treatment, the article does not explicitly state if internet-based treatment access would be more successful, except by indicating that e-health would be a more youth-friendly option. The interest in and potential for such services is identified, but the evidence of young adults being more likely to access such services is not clear. These three hypotheses were identified. The logical path from research to aim to hypothesis was clear, and the relationship between the variables and the direction were adequately operationalized. The design was a two-armed randomized controlled trial. Initially, it was hoped to recruit 300 participants in order to detect small effect size differences between the two groups. However, even though participants were recruited between September of 2013 and April 2015, only 192 participants met the inclusion/exclusion criteria. Following the online application, whereby applicants completed several symptom questionnaires and shared basic demographic information, though ethnicity and geographical area were not clearly stated, there was the telephone assessment was there to confirm involvement, and participants were randomly allocated to either a self-guided or a clinician-guided group. and all completed symptom questionnaire responses daily. Clinician contact varied according to group allocation. All applicants received a brief scripted telephone call when they began. However, the CG group then received weekly contact from one of 2 registered and experienced psychologists throughout the treatment. There's a lack of inter-rater reliability here between the 2 clinicians in the CG group. The use of categories or codes to determine the conversation content or outcomes were not used. They were only provided with information as to not introduce additional therapeutic skills in their conversations and to limit the time to 10 to 15 minutes per week. This provided the opportunity for lots of variability across this CG group. These were the measures employed in the study: primary, secondary, tertiary, and acceptability and satisfaction, and the treatment intervention. Within the study, the scoring of each of these were explained. However, the reliability and validity and reason for their inclusion was not. All measures have acceptable to good internal consistency. However, it was not 100% clear when each measure was explicitly completed by each participant. So pre or post, at 3 months, at 12 months, every day. So replicability of the study would be a challenge. It was also not clear if those recruited between 2013 and 2015 completed the treatment all at the same time at the end of that recruitment period, or whether they were staggered throughout the period. Again, replicability issues. These are the results of the primary measures outcomes. So the symptoms of depression and anxiety, there were no significant differences between the 2 groups. However, with regards to depression symptoms, both groups had improvement pre and post treatment and follow-up. But in terms of anxiety, there was an aspect where the study did not highlight this unusual occurrence or indicate why it could have occurred or what might be done to research this further in the future. Here, both groups improved pre and post treatment in terms of anxiety symptoms. However, the self-guided group improved slightly between the 3 to 12 month period, while the symptoms increased in the CG group in the same period, something that was not considered further. The secondary and tertiary measures all improved, and there were no significant differences between groups at any time. The use of figures and tables was effective in the results section. The descriptive statistics were in a self-explanatory format, as you can see here in the figure, and notes were provided as required. There was a logical flow of information, and the statistical significance of results was clear. However, it did require a moderate statistical knowledge to understand the results section. There was sound use of the multiple imputation method to mimic the complete data set when it was identified as missing at random, and this was used appropriately to provide the smallest bias and was statistically valid. The statistically appropriate replacements of data that's true, it was accurate. However, there are no clear rules as to how much missing data is considered too much in order to use this multiple imputation method. And it did influence the test statistics, so WALD had to be used because some of the parameters were estimated. The discussion and conclusion of a study summarises the main findings of the study, and as you can see here, in the relation to all of these hypotheses, it influences their original contribution to the field and gives particular emphasis to the way the findings significantly contribute to moving research literature forward. I believe this study did this quite well. As you can see here, not all of the hypotheses were supported, but did provide new, novel, and interesting information to the current research and direction for future research. This article provides a logical process through which one can understand the information. It targets a specific area of research that's currently not well understood and is a starting point for further research. It was encouraging that a number of the limitations I considered whilst reading the article were identified here in the discussion in the limitations section, so items 1 to 3. However, the recruitment difficulties, I believe, were not adequately addressed. If 21% of applicants did not complete the application, so were excluded, and 24% did not want to speak on the phone, it did reduce the power to detect between group differences significantly. Is the demand for services really reflected in this study? It's unclear. It was also a convenient sample whereby severity of symptoms, applicability to the wider target group, safeguards for those with severe symptoms were not really adequately covered. And the symptom questionnaire was repeated 35 times, so every single day of the study. Could this have been an issue with regards to attrition? Overall, this was an interesting read, but one that required some knowledge of previous psychological research, the ability and motivation to seek out and find additional research, and an understanding of statistical and terminology and application to data. The process of critically evaluating the study was a useful one, as it allowed me to consider the information I blithely take on board in the past, and where I should seek further clarification for divergent ideas. Thank you.